Hey everybody, welcome to episode 82 of the Is That Normal podcast. And today we're going to talk about some things that are true and maybe a few things that aren't.
Yeah, so I'm excited about this episode. I think this is just a really cool thing. It's something I'm passionate about because we're going to talk about how all stories really point back to the one true story. And so as we talk about the fiction that we enjoy, one of the reasons we enjoy that is because it really usually says something about the way God designed the world and designed us and designed relationships. So anyway, we're going to talk about that today. But before we do that, I thought we'd play an old favorite youth group game, Two Truths and a Lie. All right?
Yes, let's do it.
So the way this game works, for those of you who don't know, is each of us are going to share three things. Two of them are true. One of them is not. And we have to guess which one of the things that each of us said is not true. Okay. So I'll let you go first.
All right. Okay. So let's see. The first thing would be, I have lived in the basement of someone else's house.
Okay.
The second one would be, I have rappelled off the side of a building.
Okay. Basement, rappelling. Okay.
The third one would be, I have worked at a theme park centered around dolls.
Okay, well, I know that is absolutely true. And I also, this is funny, I found this out. Did you know that Kyle Idleman, who is a pastor out in Kentucky, he worked there as well?
What?
Yeah,
no
at
way.
some point he worked there as a tour guide. I guess because he was connected to the Christian church, and so he's connected to Ozark Christian Church at some point, or Christian College, and worked there at some point.
That's
and
crazy.
actually, I think his family's from Carthage. Anyway, so you've definitely worked at the Precious Moments Chapel.
True.
Not as a tour guide, but as a
night security.
I do know that's true. So
There are stories.
And I've seen you in a lot of basements. So I'm going to say the rappelling off the side of the building is not true.
You are correct.
Okay. All right. Good. All right. So here's mine. So I used to make plastic in a laboratory. Mm-hmm. I have quite a collection of equine trophies. And when I was in high school, one of my favorite bands was Led Zeppelin.
Ooh, man. I'm going to go with equine trophies.
Oh, actually, I have a lot of equine trophies, both from my childhood, because I grew up, my dad raised
I should have known that, yes.
large Belgian draft horses, and I have horse pulling trophies and horse show trophies. And then since then, our church has a member who also has large horses.
I should have known that.
And we've won several equine trophies at the parade here in Buffalo.
True.
So anyway, no, Led Zeppelin was not one of my favorite bands in high school. They weren't heavy enough for me.
That makes sense.
So I've grown to appreciate them more over time. So
that's awesome. Very good.
So while what we just did has absolutely nothing with help getting your family closer to Jesus, it was fun and it's a fun game. So we play that. We've taught a lot of teenagers how to lie well.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I think so. Anyway, but we do believe that parents can use fiction stories to help their children grow in their faith, and so that's what we're going to talk about today.
Welcome back to the Is That Normal podcast, and if we encourage you, if you're not already, following us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, subscribe to the podcast on the podcast places.
Podcast places, that's right. Wherever you get podcasts. Yes.
IsThatNormal.org, you can follow, find out information there, catch notes and updates and things like that. So, anyways, if you're not doing that, go do it.
That's right.
Do that.
We're
want you.
everywhere.
That's right. We want to do that. So we're talking about fiction. So, Mark, why do you think fiction stories can help us share truth?
Well, first of all, I love stories, and I've grown up. I've been an avid reader all my life, and my mom was a reader, and she fed me a lot of good books, and I just like consumed fiction books growing up, and continue to do that. And I just love stories. I love movies. I love, I just love everything there is about story. Mm-hmm. But as I've done that, I've realized that there's a reason why I love stories, which we'll get to here in just a moment. But so, Randall, what were some of your favorite characters to pretend to be like when you were growing up?
Oh man, we're throwing it back for this 90s kid because it was good. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles all the way.
Yes, that's
Donatello.
Good.
And to this day, I could still recite word for word the theme song, the original theme song for the Ninja Turtles.
So two quick Ninja Turtle stories.
Yeah.
So one, I was recently at Incredible Pizza in Springfield with my family, and they've got a 4-person Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game. And so I got like my wife and my 2 little girls.
Let's
we
go.
were like playing, but yeah. And so I was so proud because I asked Ruthie. I was like, Ruthie, who do you want to be? And she's like, totally Michelangelo, which is my favorite Ninja Turtle. So anyway,
pizza and skateboards.
That's right, man. So that was good. And then my second one is I was looking through one of our streaming services that we watch movies on with my family, and I saw that they had Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2: The Secret of the Ooze.
Secret of the Ooze. That's my favorite.
So I told my family that we need to watch that. And they weren't as excited as I was.
You need to invite me over because I could almost quote that entire movie, man. It's got Vanilla Ice in it and everything.
Right, right. How can you go wrong with Vanilla Ice in a film? Can't go wrong with that, right? So,
yes.
So here's what I figured out, right? Though, is that there's a reason we love those stories and place ourselves in them. Because we all do that as kids. We role play, we find characters that we want to be. It's because they share some truth about how life is and how life works. And so we long for that truth that we see behind these stories. And so give me some more of your favorite stories.
Oh, man. Boy, I love... when I was a kid, I got into, I loved reading fiction books by... I liked Where the Red Fern Grows and books like that where it was a lot of times it was set with someone who was close to my own age, and there was there was
a little bit of history in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And,
and I'm a huge history buff, so really anything that somehow ties in some sort of historical, set in a historical time period or something like that, I'm all about.
And one thing I love about those kind of stories where it's fictional, but it's set in a real place and real time, you see those commonalities of the way life is, but also that pattern of life. So even though it may be a different time period, there's common things that are just always going to be the joys and struggles of mankind, and
absolutely.
we can point those out. The story, there's love, there's family, there's loss, there's fear. I mean, there's all these real life issues that are played out in this story.
There was another book by, I believe, the same author that was still one of my favorite books as childhood, called The Summer of the Monkeys.
Yes, yeah.
Did you ever read that?
I did. Yes,
I loved that book. Yeah. That was a great one too.
Yeah,
so
that is,
the kid spent his whole summer trying to catch all of these monkeys that escaped from a circus train for a large reward, and it was a lot of fun.
That's a great book. I'm totally those are on my short list of books kids should read, which we'll talk about here in a minute. So that's great. And so here's the cool part: if we're watching, in whatever story we're reading about, we're going to see in some way that story most likely points us back to the one true story, which is the story of God and his people and what God wants for us. So there's echoes of the inscription of God in these stories. Whether the author realizes it or not, you're gonna see some of those things if you're watching for them.
So what are some examples? Oh
man, I could just talk all day probably about this, but just some good ones for me. Just recently, my family and we watched the new Dune movie, which I'm a Dune fan. That's based on some books that were written back in the 60s. Because I'm a sci-fi fan, they're kind of these sci-fi fantasy books. I'm also a huge fan of the 1984 Dune movie, super good. So, but we watched it, and one of the things my wife said after we got done, she's like, these stories, these fantasy stories, they're so good about pointing out the fact that we all are looking for God, we're looking for truth, we're looking for the supernatural. Because this book is so much about politics and economy and the mundane part of just life, but there's something supernatural and beyond that really is what we're longing for. And so it speaks to that longing that we have as humans for God and the supernatural and the divine and for eternity, so clearly shown in this book about space worms, right? I loved reading Stephen King novels when I was a kid. You can judge me for that if you'd like to, but I did. He's a great storyteller, one of the best storytellers, and I particularly liked his Gunslinger series. There was this series of books about, again, kind of a fantastical other world, another dimension that had old stuff and new stuff in it. It had stuff from the medieval times and the Old West and the future all mashed up, and just really cool. But in it, it's really all about our search for belonging, which I'm reading a book right now. We're going to review here in a few months about the biggest questions that our society asks, and the underlying biggest question is where do I belong? And these series of books speak to all of that if you're looking for it. And then, man, superhero movies. Like, how much money has the Marvel Cinematic Universe made? Like,
they're printing.
That's like crazy, right? And they keep making it, and we keep watching it. And why do we keep watching it? Is because we know that we all are looking for a hero, and even superheroes, their powers aren't enough. They're looking for something more. We see their flaws and their shortcomings, and in them, we see our need for an ultimate hero. And one of my favorite examples of that is in and this is a little older superhero movie, but in Superman Returns, they're putting that tension out there that Superman's supposed to be this almost Messiah savior, and yet he has all these shortcomings, that he's not enough. And so really good. That's like the gospel 101 right there,
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Yeah.
So how do parents help their children connect with this thought and maybe start to see some of those parallels in there?
Yeah. Number one is, I think we make sure to see how compelling the true story is. Like, no matter how good a fiction story is, it's not nearly as good as the real story.
Yeah.
And so we want to help our children connect with the Bible. Our last episode on the YouVersion, we talked a lot about how that needs to be central. But as we do that, we need to help our kids realize the Bible is far from boring. There is the answer to every question that our heart is looking for right there in these epic stories that we need to share and tell and retell and pick apart. And so we want to make sure that people, our children, are getting that. And so one of the keys to that is, get a Bible translation that's understandable for them. At our church, we use the Christian Standard Bible, which is written at a 5th grade level. So most kids, once they start reading very much at all, they can handle it. It's very accurate to Scripture. There's other translations out there that are good too, but that's one that we particularly are using because I think it really connects truth and readability very well. And so then when you're doing that, start having discussions about the reality of the Bible. If you read all of the Bible, really. There's a lot of parts that would be R-rated if you made it into a movie. Especially you look at the Old Testament, there's some graphic things. I remember years ago, this book came out and it got banned. It was one of the only books that I remember getting banned that was in the children's section. I think it was at Barnes & Noble. That you couldn't buy it at Barnes & Noble because it was the Lego Bible. And so they took the Bible and took all of those really violent and strange parts of the Bible, and they made it with Lego figures, and it was this graphic Bible. And so Abraham sacrificing Isaac on the altar, and I mean just other things that we won't talk about on our podcast that they were showing very clearly about how that happened with Lego figures. So yeah, it's pretty cool stuff. So So we make sure they understand how compelling the true story is. That's a great place to start. But then we also want to engage in fiction stories with them. So if we're going to help them see how fiction points to truth, we probably got to have to guide them through that process. So read the same books that they're reading, watch movies with them, and have discussions about how these things point us back to truth. And so, so I wanted to kind of, and you've already kind of started this for us, I wanted to maybe mention some great places to start with that. And so some good books to read. I love Where the Red Fern Grows and The Summer of the Monkeys. Those are fun. They're engageable for kids. Kids could read them. You could read them aloud as a family. I know we've done that a lot. We've also read the Little House on the Prairie series with our family over and over again. Because while they're true stories, I mean, they're written in a fictional type novel format. Great conversation pieces. But then, like I said, I'm this sci-fi fantasy kind of guy, and man, books like The Hobbit, C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy, which I'm reading right now myself, is probably the best thing I've ever read about spiritual warfare. So if you want to help your kids see the reality of spiritual warfare, man, the Space Trilogy by C.S. Lewis is the go-to place. Read that with them, talk about what it's talking about. Another, man, my kids and I cannot stop talking about this book. It's written in the 1930s, called The Brave New World. And it's this futuristic, this is the way future is going to be, written in the 30s. And it reads like what we're watching right now in our world. And it's just so much good stuff to talk about with truth and life with kids. And then you kind of go back to those like historical period books, The Outsiders, from the 50s. That's a fun book. Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn, those are good books.
Love
Like
Mark Twain stuff.
Yeah, so there's all sorts of, you can read the classics. We've read Dickens with our kids and Jane Austen with our kids, and so I mean, there's just a wealth of places to start. But start somewhere, find out what kind of things your kids are into, read some of those books with them, have those discussions. And then lastly, we got to make sure they see themselves in the story. So as you watch movies, read these books, engage in these stories, asking them, where do you see yourself in this story? What do you identify with? What about this stands out to you? What about this is challenging for you? How would you have responded in that situation? And that's probably one of the best questions to really get to their heart, is like, what would you have done in that situation that character found them in? So just start having those kind of discussions.
Yeah. Awesome. Great stuff. So as we wrap up our 2 takeaways, the first is Christmas time. So watch, read, and share the Christmas story. Not a Christmas story. Not the.
I wouldn't not recommend that either.
Ralphie and his Red Ryder BB gun.
That's
a classic.
Good thing to watch and talk about as well. There's a lot
I
of
can
truth
promise
in
that will get watched at least once in my household this season. So, but
my favorite part is when the kid's in his like snowsuit and he can't put his arms down. That's good stuff. I like that.
Man, that's every year. That's on the short list of movies. But that you can do that. But the real Christmas story, the story of Christ's birth, and just to take some time and watch and read and share that with your family. And then the second is to start some discussions about story with your children this week.
Yes. Be abnormal.